It's not just any sea. It's the most disputed body of water on Earth. 7 nations, countless conflicts, and one superpower pushing the limits. The South China Sea isn't just a collection of islands and reefs, it's a battleground where countries build military bases on tiny rocks, manufacture islands from nothing, and stake their claim over billions of dollars in resources. But one country wants it all China. They say it's theirs from shore to shore. Today, we uncover why China is making this audacious claim, what's really at stake, and most importantly, the powerful narrative Beijing sells to its people and the world. Because this isn't just a sea, it's a flashpoint that could shape the future of global power. For centuries, the South China Sea was a vast, untamed frontier, a place where fishermen cast their nets and traders sailed its waters. But everything changed when the French arrived in Southeast Asia. With their mighty navy, they carved out a colony they called Indochina, today's Vietnam. It wasn't long before they set their sights on the scattered islands of the South China Sea, planting their flag and claiming them as their own. China was furious, so was Japan. The world was shifting, and these islands were no longer just remote outposts. They were strategic gold mines, controlling trade and military dominance. The Japanese, inspired by European empires, were building an empire of their own. And by the late 1930s, they weren't just expanding, they were conquering. With blitzkrieg speed, Japan swept across the Pacific, seizing island after island. The South China Sea, it became a Japanese lake. But then came the Americans. As World War II raged, the US launched its full might, pushing Japan back island by island. Bombs fell, battles raged, and in the end, Japan surrendered. The empire crumbled, and with it, the South China Sea was left open, ready for the next great struggle for power. For centuries, these rocky islands lay forgotten, mere specks in the vast blue expanse. But then came World War II, and suddenly, they were everything. Strategic crossroads, stepping stones for power, whoever controlled them controlled the seas. China, with an ancient map in hand, declared, "These are ours." Vietnam, torn in two but rising from colonial chains, pointed to its history and France's past claims. The Philippines, newly independent, had little interest until a maverick businessman sailed to a cluster of 53 islands, planted his flag, and called it the territory of Freedomland. But sovereignty is a fickle thing. The Philippine government, seeing the tide turn, annexed the islands, claiming them as their own. The world now watched as nations, once indifferent, scrambled for dominance. The islands, once nameless rocks, had become pawns in a high-stakes game one that was just beginning.
Philippines has made it clear it will take all possible measures to counter any attempt by China to impose an air defense zone or restrict freedom of flights over the South China Sea.
The roots of this conflict stretch back to 1947 when China's nationalist government sketched an 11-dash line across the sea, laying claim to its waters. When Mao Zedong's communists took over, they kept the claim, but trimmed it to 9 dashes of subtle change with seismic consequences. For decades, the dispute lay dormant, but in the 1970s, everything changed. Beneath the waves lay rich as oil and gas reserves that could fuel an empire. China moved aggressively, seizing the Paracel Islands from Vietnam in 1974, killing 65 Vietnamese soldiers. Then, in 1988, it took Johnson Reef. And in 1994, Mischief Reef, escalating tensions with Vietnam and the Philippines. Today, the South China Sea is a chessboard where nations maneuver for control. China dominates the Paracels, while Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei hold stakes in the Spratlys. Fighter jets roar overhead, naval ships shadow one another, and artificial islands bristle with military bases. As tensions rise over the South China Sea, the international community has long been working on rules to determine who controls what waters. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, was designed to bring order, establishing that a country can claim a 12 nautical mile territorial sea and up to a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone for resource rights. But this framework directly clashes with China's sweeping U-shaped line claim. Nearly every country on Earth has ratified UNCLOS, except for one major power, the United States. While the US follows UNCLOS in practice, it refuses to ratify it, a pattern in its approach to global agreements, upholding the system without fully committing to its legal constraints. Rather than settling disputes, the 200 nautical mile rule has fueled competition. Countries scramble to claim tiny islands, knowing that control over even the smallest landmass extends their easy. China has aggressively expanded its presence, built military bases, and even created artificial islands where none existed before. Instead of reducing tensions, UNCLOS has unintentionally incentivized nations to push their territorial limits, turning the South China Sea into one of the world's most contested regions. Escalation in the 2020s, the South China Sea boils over. By the early 2020s, the South China Sea had become a battleground of power and defiance. Confrontations surged as China ramped up its aggressive territorial claims, locking horns with the Philippines in perilous maritime clashes. In August 2023, Beijing brazenly unveiled a revised territorial map, now with a 10th dash, an audacious attempt to swallow Taiwan and nearly all of the Spratly Islands. The world pushed back. Vietnam reinforced its defenses. Indonesia and the Philippines fought to rally global support. Despite its proclaimed neutrality, the United States moved to check China's creeping dominance, strengthening alliances and expanding military drills with regional partners. Washington's message was clear: the 2016 arbitral ruling must be respected, and Chinese expansion would not go unchallenged. The U.S. bolstered its presence through AUKUS, the Quad, and deeper ties with ASEAN nations, drawing Beijing's fury. By 2024, the situation had reached a boiling point. At the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. did not mince words, condemning illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive actions in the South China Sea. He stopped just short of naming China, but his warning was unmistakable. When asked about the possibility of Filipino deaths due to Chinese water cannons, his response was chilling. It would be very, very close to an act of war. As the superpowers maneuver for dominance, the South China Sea is no longer just a contested waterway. It's a powder keg waiting for a spark. The South China Sea remains a place of uneasy silence, where warships prowl beneath the waves, fighter jets trace invisible battle lines in the sky, and coast guards play a dangerous game of cat and mouse. But silence is deceptive. History has shown that when tensions simmer for too long, they boil over. The stakes are higher than ever. The world's busiest shipping lanes cut through these waters, carrying trillions in global trade. Oil and gas reserves promise untold wealth. And beneath the surface, a much bigger battle is being fought, not just over territory, but over the future of global power itself. China sees the South China Sea as its rightful backyard, key stepping stone in its rise. The Philippines, Vietnam, and others see it as their sovereign right. The United States sees a line that cannot be crossed without consequence. The question is, who blinks first? Because in a world where one wrong move can ignite a global crisis, the South China Sea isn't just a conflict of maps and maritime law. It's a test of power, resolve, and the very balance of the 21st century. And the world is watching. Stay ahead with the latest geopolitics news. Subscribe now and be part of the conversation. Watch, like, and show some love.